Squares may fit into the category of cookies because their batters are more cookie-like than cake-like. But if you love squares, you know they're a category all on their own. I'll start by showing you the fundamentals, a fudge brownie. Then we'll advance into the world of pumpkin swirl cheesecake squares. After that, I know you'll be ready for lemon meringue squares. And for a little fun, I'll show you Rocky Road cinema torts, a fun take on squares. But let's start with the basics, a fudge brownie. I love adding nuts to brownies. I have a cup of pecan halves, but I'm not going to add them raw. I want to roast them first. And I don't want to just roast them, I want to salt roast them. So I'm going to take just a tablespoon of butter and melt it in a sauté pan over medium-high heat. Now I can add the pecans. In goes a half a teaspoon of sea salt. The salt will cling onto the nuts as they're toasting, and when I chop them up and put them in the brownies, you'll get those little crunchy bits of sea salt. You want to keep the pecans moving in the pan as you toast them so they brown evenly. And it takes about 8 minutes to get them a nice golden brown. I'll set these aside to cool so I can start on the brownie batter itself. Now, what I've got here is 4 ounces of unsweetened chocolate. That means this is intense. I've chopped it up, and I'm going to add it directly to the pot, but I'm not going to melt it just on its own. I'll add a cup and a quarter of butter. A cup and a quarter is 10 ounces. Stir this over medium heat. Unsweetened chocolate is the only style of chocolate you can really truly melt over direct heat. This is because unsweetened chocolate is the most stable of the chocolates. There's no added elements. It's just the pure cocoa solids. I've got what looks like a beautiful chocolate sauce, but of course there's no sugar in this. Whisk in a cup of regular sugar first, and then 3/4 of a cup of light brown sugar. I like using a bit of brown sugar in my brownie recipes because it just adds an intensity of flavor and that added moisture. And whisk that in. And now for the eggs. 3 eggs, and I'll add them one at a time. Now, something that's important is to make sure you whisk or mix your brownie batter by hand, never in a mixer, because the added air will fluff up the brownies, and then you'll end up with a cake-style brownie. So just mix your brownie batter by hand and mix it gently. You can feel the batter start to thicken up with the addition of the eggs. Now, a good 2 teaspoons of vanilla and just a cup of all-purpose flour. Because I don't want these brownies to be light and airy, I'm not going to sift the flour into the brownie mix. I switch to a spatula now just to make sure I can get into the corners of the sauce pot. And I stir it just until it's blended. To pump up the chocolate flavor, a 1/4 cup of cocoa powder. Because cocoa powder has lumps, I do sift this in. A brownie recipe doesn't need to have baking soda or baking powder in it because I don't want it to rise up and be fluffy. And because I have the salt toasted pecans, I don't need to add salt. If you're making just plain brownies, then I would add half a teaspoon of salt to this recipe. What I'm going to do is set aside 12 pecan halves for the top of the brownies, and the rest I'll chop up coarsely. How easy is that? A good brownie recipe is a perfect way to introduce yourself not just to the world of squares, but even the world of baking altogether. Using an ice cream scoop, I'm portioning these into an actual square pan. These are made for brownies. If you don't have a pan like this, you can simply use an 8-inch square pan. Once you feed the brownies to your friends and family and get that welcome response, that gets you hooked on baking. The pan has been greased, and the finishing touch is a pecan on top of each brownie. Baking brownies is where I first got fascinated with the magic of baking because you take this gooey brown mixture and you put it in the oven, and as it bakes, it transforms into luscious fudgy brownies. I've preheated the oven to 350, and these take just 20 minutes to bake. You know when they're done when the surface of the brownie just loses its shine. Yep, they've got that matte surface to them. So these brownies are done. Now, probably the only hard part about brownies is that you have to let them cool in the pan for an hour before you eat them. But once cooled, just like these, you can pop them out, or if you're baking them in a square pan, cut them into brownie shapes, and they're ready to serve. Because of the density of the brownies and the moisture, they stay fresh for days, but it's rare that they're around longer than a day.